Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm Jon Gillin, and this, of course, is Silversound Guitar. And today, I'm bringing you part two in this series of building a new practice routine to start the new year. So last week, we talked a little bit about technical exercises. This week, we're going to kind of unpack the mystery of how to practice chords, scales, and arpeggios. The thing is, there tends to be this sense that chord scales and arpeggios are so much. It's overwhelming. It's huge. So what we're going to try to do is just distill it and make it so it's manageable. What we're really trying to do here is build manageable chunks, maybe 10, 15 minutes worth of practice for you that you can break up your practice session into 2 or 3 sections of 15, 20, maybe even 30 minutes a day. And in doing so, you're going to make greater gains in a shorter amount of time instead of trying to sit down and go, I need to practice all of this in 1 hour or 2 hours or whatever you're thinking. By breaking these things up, we're able to navigate everything a little bit more conveniently. So let's go ahead and have a look. I think the first thing we're going to jump into is just a sense of what it means to break these up. So the first thing that we want to jump into is just make sure that we've got a sense of what we're practicing. So let's say here I'm looking for a major chord. I'm going to just play the major chord. I'm going to play one major scale that goes with this. I'm not going to worry about a bunch of extra shapes or a bunch of extra chords. Now, if you're not in this particular chord, I'll kind of demonstrate a little bit later what you can do if maybe you're playing drop 2 voicings or triads or something like that. But the concept is generally pretty similar. So if I'm playing this A major chord, I need to practice my chord. I'm going to go ahead and play that chord, but now I'm going to also look for the scale that's going to go with this A major chord. And in this case, I'm looking for an A major scale. So what I've done is I've grouped my major chord and my major scale into one thing. And if you're working on the cage system, this would be an E shape major chord. I'm going to look for that E shape major scale. It goes right with it. So I'm just going to play that scale. And then I'm going to play it descending. Now I'm going to play the chord again. So notice what I've done. I've played chord, scale, chord. I'm trying to create these layers that I can stack on top of each other in order to see everything that's going on. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to play the scale, but I'm going to camp out on the notes that are in the chord. I'm trying to reinforce how this chord interacts with this particular scale. So when I play the A, I'm going to play the scale now and only play the notes that are in this chord shape. I'm not worried about the arpeggio, just the notes in the chord shape are the ones I'm going to hang out on, right? So just like that, okay? And then play it descending as well, doing the same thing. Camp out on the notes that are in that chord shape right there. And then keep going. So hopefully now you're able to see how those notes in the chord interact with the notes in the scale and vice versa. Now that I'm comfortable with that, I can also look at the arpeggio, which in this case is mostly the chord shape with the exception of that 3. Anytime you're playing the arpeggio, I do think it's really good to kind of mutter to yourself or say it out loud or whatever, sing them something. Talk about the notes that you're playing. So if this is the root note, then I've got the 3rd here, the 5th, root, 3rd, 5th, root. Now the thing is, the arpeggios are really important to be able to understand how they're laid out, that they're using the 1st note, the 3rd note, and the 5th note of a major scale. And the reason is because now, once I'm comfortable with those, 1, I can identify them, and 2, if I need to in the future, I understand that that root, 3rd, 5th can be manipulated in order to create even dominant 7th chords. You can create major and minor chords. You can create your diminished chords, and everything else, a whole variety of chords can come outside of that. And that's really kind of the idea. Okay, so I've played my chord, I played my scale, and I played my arpeggio here. And really what I'm trying to do is just identify how all that fits together. The next big thing is, of course, to start breaking it up and see it in sections of maybe 3 strings at a time. And this can be really helpful if you're working on your triads as well. So here, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to see that if I were to play my major scale from the 3rd string up, it's going to look like this. Okay, so that's just still the A major scale. I'm still thinking A major. I have an A major chord that sits right here, where I've got 3, 5, 1 right there. That's just really the top part of this chord. I'm just taking the higher 3 strings. I'm gonna practice it, be able to see how that fits in there. And now I can add on to that. What's really important about this is sometimes when we see that whole scale shape, it's really tough for us to navigate inside of smaller sections, like 2, 3, string groups, or even in the middle of the fretboard here where I see this. It's kind of weird. It sounds weird to play it like that. Kind of like to end on that A anyway. But then I can see this part of that same chord shape. So if I look at this, I can see that right here on my pinky, that's that note. And then I've got this note right here on the 3rd string, 6th fret, and then here I've got the 5th fret, 2nd string. And really what that does is that gives me these 3 notes. And this is just a triad. It's a 3-note chord. And I'm taking it from this bigger shape. So by being able to see the scale right through here, even in those 3 strings, I'm reinforcing the scale, I'm reinforcing the arpeggio, the root, 3rd, and the 5th, and I'm reinforcing this idea. So now the next thing that you can do with this, if let's say you're working on your modes, this is a great thing for practicing modes. I'm going to look at the A. Of course, an A major chord can be a 1 chord in the key of A, it can be a 4 chord in the key of E, and it can be a 5 chord in the key of D. Now, if I want to, I can take this chord and I can treat it as a 5 chord in the key of D. So what that means is I want to be thinking about a D major scale here over this chord. So if I'm going to play that, it's going to start here. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp. Depending on how you want to do this, I like to come back here and get this G. You can also slide up. So there's G, A, B. And if you want to continue C sharp, D, I usually prefer just to kind of come up here and then come back down because I'm trying to focus on what can I play inside of these shapes in this area right here. So now as I descend, I'm going to go ahead and include that A, G, and then kind of come back up to the D right there. So in doing so now, what I've done is I've changed the context of this A chord. So watch what happens when I play the notes in the D major scale, but that emphasize that A chord. So again, I'm thinking in the key of D, and I'm playing the notes that are an A chord, so not an A major scale. So if I'm thinking about that, I have this note here, okay, and then I've got the B, C sharp, D, E, and then F sharp, and then G natural, because D major. So again, I'm camping out on the notes that are in an A major chord, but I'm playing the D major scale, right? So right? So coming back down, there's that A, D. Cool. So now that I've done that, I've enabled myself to sort of begin to think a little bit more through how does that D major scale interact with that A major chord. Now, that's kind of a complex thing. That's a big step, but I wanted to cover that while we're sort of in this position. Now, perhaps you're working on your triads up and down the fretboard. Now, triads are a great way to navigate the fretboard. I'm going to do a whole separate video on those because it's worth it. But when you're doing this, let's say we're still operating with that A. I know I've got an A triad on these 3 strings here, and then I have an A triad right here. And then I've got one more that's going to be up here. This one's always fun to get. So it's on the 14th fret for these 2 fingers, and then that's obviously on the 12th. So when you're playing that, though, what you want to be able to do is ask yourself, can I see the scale that I'm trying to play over in all 3 of these places? Now, if you're not really familiar with your scales, I'd advise you kind of working on those bigger shapes the cage scale shapes first and be able to see all of that. But as you're playing these triads, what can be really useful is then see how the triad itself interacts with the scales. So for example, if I'm trying to think of an A major scale that fits in here, it's going to be right there. It's part of that bigger C-shaped chord. But now what I've done, I'm enabling myself to be able to see what goes on here. And then I can think about shifting up to a different scale shape now and still emphasize the notes in an A major chord. So that's a real important part there. The same thing can be done with your arpeggios. You can move those arpeggios up and down the fretboard. Obviously, the arpeggios, the idea of the root third, fifth, that's basically what you're doing with a triad anyway. So it can be a little bit redundant when you're going through just those triads, but definitely make sure that you're able to see the bigger shapes here too, or find different ways to play those same shapes, just like that. So for example, I don't have to play that A, C sharp, E here. I can play A, C sharp, E here. So it can be a little game that you can play with yourself to sort of stretch that out, find some different ways to navigate those scales, chords, and arpeggios. But once again, the whole point of the scales, chords, and arpeggios is in order to build up these layers so you're beginning to get your fretboard really mastered. You're able to find your way up and down the fretboard in at least one key. Because what's great about guitar, if you can find it in one key, then you just shift it back or forwards in order to build the next key. So start with one chord shape, and then one scale just to overlap those and then play the arpeggio. Are there other methods to do that? Like I said, absolutely. We'll talk about triads, drop twos, major and minor seventh chords, and all sorts of fun stuff. But this is a great way to just start overlapping this idea of chords, scales, and arpeggios in order to improve your fretboard knowledge. So until next time, I will see you guys, and I'm Jon Gillin, and this is Silversound Guitar.